Welcome to week 4 of our Utah.js online conference series this year. This is the final week. You made it all the way to the end. If you missed one of the first 3 talks, the miseducation of CSS on week 1, building components at scale on week 2, or quantity beats quality on week 3, don't worry, you have until the end of October to view those here on Vito. Same website you're using right now. You can just pull up those old talks and you can watch them again, or you can watch them for the first time. All right. Today's talk I'm very excited about, but first I have to tell you that we have some really cool Utah.js merch for sale. We have mugs like this one. We have cell phone cases with the Utah.js logo. Really cool little subtle yellow Utah state with a JS in it. We have face coverings, which would just be great, I think, to have as a memento for this year. You can show your grandchildren. And lots of other things. Of course, we have shirts, we have socks, we have tote bags, lots of really cool stuff. So check that out. Click Utah.js merchandise on the website. Okay, this week's talk, our final talk for the talk series, comes to you from Michael Richardson. The talk is titled Yarn 2, a Next Generation Package Manager. Let me tell you a little bit about our presenter today. Michael is a software developer. He is a community organizer. He is an outdoor enthusiast. He has written software in lots of different languages, including JavaScript, Java, Kotlin, C#, SQL, Cypher, and even VB.NET. As a technical lead at Kroger Digital, Michael helps create compelling web experiences for millions of Kroger customers, which is pretty cool. So please join me now in welcoming Michael Richardson to our talk series for today. And don't forget, as usual, there will be a Q&A session with Michael at the end of the talk. So stick around for that. And don't forget to chat. Michael will, of course, be available, as all of our speakers are during the presentation. You can chat with them while you're watching their talk, which is kind of a cool feature. All right. Thank you so much for attending this year's Utah.js 2020 online conference series. We will see you next year, hopefully in person.
Hi, I'm Michael Richardson. Welcome to Yarn 2, a next generation package manager. Like many good things, it all started with a tweet. In August of 2019, I replied to a tweet and mentioned that I had tried out the Yarn feature plug and play. Mel, the lead maintainer of Yarn, replied, encouraging me to try out Yarn 2. Yarn 2 was still pre-release at the time, but I gave it a try. I was impressed. I also fairly quickly encountered a minor edge case bug, which got fixed quite promptly. That was pretty cool as well. That was just over a year ago. Yarn 2 has come a long way since then. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's talk about Yarn Classic, the 1.x version. Yarn made a big splash when it came on the scene a few years back. It was an alternative to the default package manager at the time, NPM. Yarn promised better performance and more reliable, repeatable builds, in part due to a unique lock file. I've used Yarn fairly consistently for several years now, and I've really enjoyed using it. Yarn 2 is a significant re-architecture and rewrite of the Yarn project. It improves on a variety of features from the original Yarn, adds a few more, and defaults to a really impressive package install strategy called plug and play. Let's skim through some of the improvements. The Yarn source code has been refactored to be highly modular, utilizing a plugin based architecture. Much of what we would see as the core functionality of Yarn is implemented as plugins. If Yarn doesn't offer a feature or command that you want, you can add it yourself. I expect to see a lot of interesting developments in the plugin space. Yarn 2's console output is very clean and easy to read. It clearly identifies each step in the install process and the associated warnings or errors. Each output message has a specific code, which can then be easily referenced in the documentation or searched online. Yarn 2 also offers enhanced support for workspaces. While workspaces were a big selling point for Yarn 1, Yarn 2 has made some big advancements in this area as well for improved developer experience. Yarn 2 also contains the new command yarn DLX, which can be used to run one-off scripts. It's a lot like npx, but it's actually a bit safer. And the real star, in my mind, is the use of plug and play as the default package install strategy. Plug and play is often shortened to PNP, and we'll use that acronym occasionally through the rest of the talk. In order to understand plug and play, we should first understand what it's not, why it's different from the current method of package installation. To do that, we have to talk about Node. When resolving module references, Node looks for the appropriate file in the Node modules folder using a method called require.resolve. For our purposes, we don't have to know the ugly details of how resolve works. Frankly, I don't know how it works because I haven't really had a need to. I leave that to the package manager authors. Now, until I do have a need, I have better things to do, like building software, taking hikes in the woods, and watching movies with my family. So Node has resolved modules this way since before Node package managers even existed. Node came first. Package managers have to be compatible with Node's resolution logic. They have to do it Node's way, and that means copying files into Node modules. This takes time and introduces a variety of issues, some of which you may be familiar with. For example, creating folders nested so deeply that they can't be easily deleted, or a Node modules folder with more than 160,000 files and over a gigabyte in size. That's what I work with at my day job. The web of package dependencies creates complex folder structures, and they always seem to get messed up. You may have been through this scenario yourself. I'm about to tear my hair out, trying to get my project to run. In desperation, I delete the Node modules folder, reinstall, and magically everything starts working again. This sounds like a fantastic system, right? So let's say that we want to avoid these issues. How do we get around this problem? It may seem intractable. We clearly need our packages. Node needs them to be arranged properly in the Node modules folder. So in a way, we're stuck. But what if we could stop playing by Node's rules and start playing by our own rules? The answer that Yarn came up with is to simply override Node's built-in methods for module resolution. JavaScript is so flexible that you can override core pieces of functionality and essentially say, yeah, don't do that, do this instead. It's kind of ridiculous, but in this case, ridiculously useful. Yarn overrides require.resolve and FS, the file system API. This allows Yarn to play person in the middle, essentially setting its own rules for module resolution. As a result, Yarn can store the packages however is most convenient for Yarn and the user. So what might a better system look like? Here's the way that Yarn Plug and Play lays it out. Yarn stores each package as a single file, a compressed zip archive in a dedicated Yarn cache folder. When Node needs a file from a package, Yarn intercepts that request, reaches into the zip archive, pulls out decompressing that requested file, and then hands it to Node. Node gets the file that it wants, Yarn can do perfect module resolution, and everyone is happy. This system is so much more compact that you can commit the package cache to your Git repository. Yarn 2 supports a workflow called zero install, where a repository can be cloned and then the application can be run immediately with no install step necessary. Zero installs is not required. You don't have to commit your package cache, but it really is a convenient, reliable workflow. This means that your builds are no longer dependent on any external package repository or network access for that matter. Everything that you need to build and run your application is part of your source control repo. In this scenario, you really only need the package repository when you're adding or upgrading packages. Now, not every project works with plug and play right out of the box. The Node ecosystem has been living with Node modules for a long time. Some packages and tools have come to expect all of the packages to be in the Node modules folder, and they've implemented code that isn't compatible with PnP. Another potential challenge is that plug and play is more strict than using Node modules. The Node modules folder allows packages to reference other packages without declaring them as a dependency. Now, doing this has always been an unsafe behavior, but with plug and play, these unsafe access attempts are now called out as errors so that they can be fixed properly. The Yarn team has made huge efforts on fixing these kinds of problems in many popular projects, raising issues and making pull requests to help bring projects into compliance with these stricter rules. These changes benefit not just Yarn users, but all of the users of these packages. Because of this, should you encounter an error using a certain package with plug and play, you should first check that you're using the most recent version of that package, if possible. Like I said, most popular libraries and frameworks are now compatible with plug and play, and many of them are moving to using Yarn 2 for building the projects themselves. Projects such as Babel and Jest are now using Yarn 2 internally. There are a couple standouts that still don't support plug and play, namely React Native and Flow. Both of these are still completely compatible with Yarn 2 itself, but they have to utilize the built-in Node modules linker, which generates the classic Node modules folder. So let's talk about upgrading a project to Yarn 2 with plug and play. Upgrading your project to Yarn 2 itself is generally quite simple. Making your project compatible with plug and play can sometimes be the complex part. I absolutely recommend using plug and play if you can. It's wonderful. But like I mentioned, Yarn 2 also supports creating that Node modules folder if it's necessary. If you have a relatively simple project, perhaps a simple React app or an Express server, upgrading to use plug and play may be trivial. Other more complex projects may encounter more challenges. Another great feature of Yarn 2 is that it's designed to be enabled on a per project basis. Since the release of Yarn 1.0, Yarn has supported a feature that I like to call version pinning. Essentially, this allows you to embed a specific version of Yarn into your project. Once you've done this, everyone who runs Yarn in your project will use that embedded version, regardless of which version they have installed locally on their machine. This is fantastic. It solves all kinds of problems, and you should do it on all your Yarn projects today, regardless of whether you move them to Yarn 2 or not. We've been using this feature for some time at Kroger, and it's made development a lot easier. When you are upgrading a project to Yarn 2, I highly recommend that you reference the migration docs. These documents have drastically improved over time, and I can tell you from experience, they are instructive and helpful when you encounter errors. Let's take a look at a couple examples of upgrading to Yarn 2. Let's start with a simple example. First, I'm going to go ahead and create a new React app, like so. You see it's booting up Yarn 1, installing the appropriate packages for Create React app, the new React app. So you can see here it's taking all the packages that are already in my global cache on my laptop and copying them into the node modules folder right now. It's building those packages that need to be natively compiled, adding a few additional packages. Some more building, and then removing the appropriate ones as well. As all of this is part of the Create React app process. Excellent. So now we'll go ahead and CD into that repo. We'll take a look at the folders in there. And you can see one of them is the node modules folder, of course. Let's go ahead and check out how large that node modules folder is. So we're looking at 245 megabytes of node modules files in a vanilla Create React app. Let's go ahead and upgrade this React app to Yarn 2. Use Yarn set version Berry. Berry is the name for the Yarn 2 code. Just like that, we're done. We'll go ahead and do a Yarn install using Yarn version 2. You can see here it's resolving packages based on the lock file. Fetching the packages. Now in this case, it is grabbing these packages from the global cache on my laptop and copying them into the Yarn cache folder. This will take a few seconds, of course. But we'll only have to do this the one time. So as you can see here, you've got some wrapping that is breaking a little bit. You can see you've clearly got the each step defined by the brackets on the left here, so that you can see where each one begins and ends. Almost completing the fetch step, which essentially is like I said, installing those packages into the project cache. That's completed. This is the link step, and that's going to generate the pnp.js file, which will essentially gives Yarn the instructions for where to locate each package as Node asks for them. It's also going to remove that node modules folder that was added when we initially created that React app. It takes a little while to delete 245 megabytes, of course. And we didn't even count the number of files in there. It's going to build those native packages. A nice little improvement here in Yarn 2 is it keeps better track of which native packages need to be built. So if we run another Yarn install, you can see that everything goes very quickly. It's double checking that everything it needs is there. double checking the PNP.js. And we're done. Let's go ahead and take a look at that yarn cache folder and see how large it is. This is all those zip files. So you can see that one comes in at 48 megabytes. I think we can all say that's significantly less than the 245 megabytes. And of course, many less files. Only one file per package, essentially. So just to prove that everything works properly, we'll go ahead and run yarn start. It's going to build that React app and boot it up in a browser, starting the development server. And here, starting the React app. You can see that we are able to run our React app with Yarn 2. Sometimes it takes a moment to boot it up. Here it is. Excellent. This time we're going to take a look at a slightly more complex project. So what we're going to work with is the actual production website for Momentum Developer Conference, which is a conference that I run. One of the things we'll take a look right now, you'll see that we're currently running version 1.22.4 of Yarn locally. That's the most recent version of Yarn 1. And we'll also take a look, see that there's 307 megabytes of node modules for this project. So in order to set up this project for Yarn 2, we'll just do yarn set version berry as we do with the Create React app project. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to run something called the Yarn Doctor. Now, this is actually mentioned in the migration docs here. So pretty easy to run through here, and that's so that's going to run. It's going to give us a couple warnings about the packages that our project depends on but have not been declared. So we're going to go ahead and add those packages. Actually, first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the yarn lock, and that will allow all of our packages to upgrade within the specified versions that we've allowed. Because I can tell you that a lot of the current packages installed are not compatible with plug and play. So we're going to go ahead and upgrade to those, and then we're going to go ahead and add these packages that we have an undeclared dependency on. And that is going to go ahead and trigger the full install. While we're doing that, take a look here and see that there's definitely a lot of deprecated packages. You'll notice some of these say implicit dependencies on node JIP are discouraged. Those essentially what's happening there is that Yarn is calling out the fact that those packages really need the node JIP package in it, but they're not actually declaring it. So that's something that will need to be updated in the package repository. But right now, Yarn 2 is just kind of dealing with it and patching over that problem to make it easier for the users to use. All right, so it's all of our packages have been installed. It's linking and creating that PNP.js file. Let's go ahead and remove those node modules. Now that it's installed those files, let's go ahead while it's doing that and check actually how large our yarn cache is. So we do have about 98 megabytes of cache files from that package install, but that is less than a third of the size of the node modules folder. All right. So all of those modules have been built. Let's go ahead and try running yarn develop to boot up our Gatsby project. Oh, it looks like we got an error. And let's see what's happened there. Okay. So this is telling us the Gatsby source API server tried to access Babel polyfill, but it isn't declared in its dependencies. So this is one of the areas where I mentioned that plug and play is a little bit more strict than classic node modules, because even though in this case it was in the node modules, it's typically going to be in the modules, but it's not actually declared as a dependency of that package. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use something called package extensions. This allows the user to specify dependencies of packages that they don't have control over. So essentially it's telling Yarn, it's okay, I know the Gatsby source API server isn't declaring a dependency on Babel polyfill, but go ahead and give it access to that package anyway. So you can see here, this is detailed in the migration docs if you have any questions about that. So we'll go ahead and run another yarn to pick up that change to the yarnrc.yaml. Essentially that will be making small changes to the pnp.js. And we'll go ahead and try to do yarn develop and see what happens. So with those updates, we're definitely getting farther. We haven't failed right away. It's going to be building some icons. So this is showing a much more complex, like I said, a much more complex project than a standard Create React app. There's a lot of different workings of a Gatsby app. And you can see that once I've upgraded the packages, it appears to be running just fine. So it's building that development bundle. It's about to start up the app server. Here we go. We can now view the website in the browser. I think that's pretty impressive. Obviously, I think you should give Yarn 2 a try. It has a lot of great new features, and it's got the potential to make building Node apps more convenient and reliable. If there's something in Yarn that you find could be improved, you can always contribute to the project or even build a plugin. I've contributed a few times myself by opening issues and making updates to the documentation. I've always found Mail and the rest of the team to be helpful and eager to collaborate. Thank you all so much for attending my talk. Feel free to reach out to me on social media and let me know what you think of Yarn 2. Thanks.
Michael, thank you so much for that wonderful talk on Yarn 2. I learned a lot myself. I am not a Yarn user or a Yarn 2 user. I'm waiting for Yarn 3, actually. Just kidding. But we have a few questions in our Q&A now for you that we wanted to give you from some people who have seen the talk. So let's just jump into it, okay?
That sounds wonderful. And thank you for the appreciation. I really enjoyed giving the talk.
Great. So the first question, it pertains to the cache file that you can optionally commit to your project. to enable zero install. It says, how big is the cache file that you can commit to your repo for zero install?
Great question. That is going to depend on the number and size of the node modules that your project depends on. So if you have a lot of them, it's going to be larger. But so that essentially you're going to have one file for each package that is a dependency of your project and subsequent dependencies of those packages, etc. So when you see it, installing packages, when you see really any package manager installing all those packages, there's going to be one file for each of them. And Yarn is going to take that package and compress it into a zip archive and stick it in the cache folder. Now, what I've seen is that for the files, the projects that I've tested it on, that cache folder is about a third of the disk size of node modules. So significantly smaller, also drastically less files. I mean, by a factor of several orders of magnitude less files. So I think I called that out a couple times in my talk. I think one time it was like 90 megabytes or like 50 megabytes, which is not trivial. But then again, it's also not, in the our day and age where storage is cheap, it's not the end of the world either.
So at the risk of going too deep down this rabbit hole, do you really think it's a good practice to check in zip files to your source control as opposed to having them maintained as like build artifacts that you would then use for deployment?
I've been using it myself for months now, and it seems to do the job really well. There's a lot of benefits to it that you might not see at first blush. So, for example, let's say you're switching branches frequently, and there's some changes between packages in those branches. A lot of times when you're in a situation where you have to, re-download and reinstall node modules, and maybe something gets a little messed up in the process, in the case of zero installs, that's all part of your commit. And so you don't have to worry about that. You check out that branch, you've got all the packages you need, you're ready to go. The one thing that you do really have to pay attention to is that those packages are now part of your repository. So there is a potential security concern if you have untrusted committers. So let's say you're an open source project and someone untrusted makes a pull request. What you would want to do is in that pipeline, you would just double check, hey, there's actually a special Yarn command for this. I don't remember it offhand, but you can say, hey, just double check that all the packages have the right hashes, and it'll re-download, double check everything for you to ensure that it's safe.
Oh, that's cool. That makes sense. Cool. Let's move on to the next question here, which is, what is the difference between the pnp.js file and the yarn lock file?
That's a great question. So yarn lock is a file that essentially specifies the version of each package that you're going to be using. And Yarn uses that, Yarn creates that, and then will reference that after it's been created to determine what actual package versions to install. The PNP.js is essentially a map for when Yarn is using plug and play, and at runtime, it's going to help tell Yarn, all right, Node has asked for this package. Where do you find it? And it essentially creates that map of packages so that Yarn knows where to look. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent.
Cool. Let's move on to the next question here. So this one is, what is that magical shell that you are using?
I'm using Fish, which I really enjoy, and I've been using that for quite some time. So is there anything particular about it that you liked, or just thought it was slick?
Well, the autocomplete was really cool. The just the styling on it, I thought was really good.
Thank you.
You can kind of preview what what command might run if you. I guess it was if you hit the tab key.
Yes, and there's no configuration there. I've done no configuration to my shell, which I
It
think is
just figures
also
out from your history what you've done.
exactly,
You might want to do this. That's
exactly.
awesome. Cool. Fish. All right. Make a note.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to try out fish for probably years now, which is not good.
I just want it to
Okay.
work. That's where I am.
Okay, so moving on to the next question here. In your talk, you said that some packages are not compatible with plug and play. What do you mean by compatible, and are there any big packages that are popular that we should be aware of?
Absolutely. So some packages just rely on the rest of the packages to be in that node modules folder. It's just the way that they've been built, they have that expectation. Some of them have been updated to be compatible, so the newest version is going to be compatible, or maybe that newest version hasn't been released yet. But the two largest standouts where they aren't compatible and they don't really have compatibility on the horizon is React Native and Flow. So if you're using one of those, you're probably going to need to use the node modules linker to create that node modules folder.
Got it. You mentioned that there's a workaround for packages that use a undeclared package transitively, and that, of course, was using the package extension setting to suppress the error that Yarn emits about that. What are
Correct.
some of the trade-offs of making use of that workaround?
So the trade-off being that it is still an unsafe access in a way. You're essentially telling Yarn, hey, this is okay. But on the positive, you can still go ahead and use that package without, one of the ways that you could instead work is you by just directly installing that package into your project. But that's actually pretty heavy. Let's say that your dependency stops depending on that package. Then you've still got it installed into your package, into your project, and you don't actually need that anymore. Instead, putting that package extension in there just says, hey, this package didn't declare the transitive dependency, paper over that and make it okay. The best thing to do in that case is to actually create an issue in that open source repository saying, hey, you don't declare this dependency, but you use it. Can you get this fixed? Make a pull request. I'm actually planning on doing that for some of the ones that I called out in the talk.
Nice. So a follow-up to that question is, how does Yarn know that a package is using another package but not undeclared? Is it like traversing all the source code and looking for references?
You'll notice that those errors occurred at runtime. Basically what happens is at install time, Yarn has built, I don't know if you call it a map or a graph, but essentially it's saying, hey, I know that this package depends on these other packages and therefore can access them based on these criteria, etc. It doesn't know about that connection if it's not declared, if that dependency is not declared. So at runtime, let's say package A requests package B. Well, Yarn says, I can't find package B because it's not actually a dependency of package A when Node requests it. And so there's nothing that it can give back. It can't give Node back that as a result. Now, something I didn't call out in the talk is that you can choose to forego the need to use those package extensions. PnP actually has a loose mode where it will totally paper over that problem and you won't have to worry about it at all. But they actually thought about turning that on by default, decided not to because of some tricky little details. It's pretty easy to find they've put all those details in the documentation so you know what's going on. But if you find that you're really having to add a lot of package extensions, you can turn on PnP loose mode, and that's going to be a little better.
And it'll basically just globally suppress that error?
Take care of all those problems, yes.
Yeah, and then you'll have undefined is not a function instead.
Exactly, which we all know and love.
Awesome. This is our last question. Have you tried using Yarn Link with Yarn 2? And if so, does it change the workflow substantially?
I have not directly used Yarn Link with Yarn 2. They did add a new, I think it has roughly the same semantics and behavior. They did add a new command that was Yarn Portal, which actually improves the linking process. If I recall correctly, haven't used this yet, but if I recall correctly, it'll actually look at the dependencies of the package you're linking in, you're portaling in, and handle those as well. I believe that in my work, we developed a special command line app to do something like this, and I'm hoping that as we adopt Yarn 2 that we may no longer need that app.
Great. Well, again, Michael, thank you for your talk. It was great. I think Yarn is taking the world by storm, and it seems like Yarn 2 is just extending the storm, which is great. So thanks for your time today. Is there anything else you wanted to share with folks, like any way to get in touch with you or reach out to you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And I also run a conference in Cincinnati and a meetup as well. So my conference is Momentum Developer Conference, and the meetup is Cincinnati Software Craftsmanship.